Hey, Brother Daniel here. Just another rant in the work truck. Today I kind of want to talk about balance. So I'm doing my morning commute. I live, kind of out in the country, and inevitably every day for work I have to commute to the more populated areas because that is where the money is. Because nobody has any money where I live, and that is my goal in life, is to no longer have any money. Not that, people say, oh, I want to be rich enough to where I don't have to worry about money. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I want to live a life where I don't have any money. Okay? But we live in a society today where you have to have it. You have to have money. And if you know anything about money, if you know anything about the American dollar, okay, is that it is not backed by gold or silver or precious stones, but rather it is completely backed by debt. So money, not only is money worthless, but money is less than worthless. There is a really funny joke from a comedian named Louis C.K. And, not that he's an authority or that he's a fundamentalist Christian or he's a good guy. I get it. He's a degenerate. He's not a Christian. But Jack Hyles said, there's something to be learned from every man, and you got to be spiritually mature enough to sometimes be able to accept truths from strange places, and you don't have to agree 100% with everybody all the time. But there's a joke by him that says, something to the extent of, I got charged to my bank account, and I didn't have enough money for the charge, so now I have negative money in my bank account. And he goes, I don't even have nothing. He goes, I have less than nothing. And he goes, I'm just hoping that maybe one day I'll have nothing and then I'll be happy. So it would be so freeing. Lord, don't curse me or anything. But it would be so freeing to not have any money, because money is debt. Okay, obviously I got to pay my mortgage off. I got to pay, the truck payment. You got to pay the electric bill, you got to pay for groceries and diapers and, gas and all this kind of stuff. But wouldn't it be nice to just be in a situation where you don't have and don't need money? Like, I'm not talking about just don't need it. I'm talking about don't have it. I mean, people will twist the Bible and say, it says money is the root of all evil. But what the Bible actually says, the love of money is the root of all evil. So my root must be really good, because I hate money. Not only do I not love money, but I absolutely hate money. I hate spending money. I hate having money. I want to live in a situation where I no longer have any money. Lord willing, we'll get there someday. But I want to talk about balance, because like I said, I live out in the country. You got to commute to the city. And what ends up happening is, the commute there sucks, but the commute back is great. Let me tell you why. Because the commute there, the type of people and how people drive, how people treat other people on the road, how people see other people on the road, it just progressively gets worse and worse as you go into the city. And then when you're done with your day, if you've lived, as you progressively go out of the city back in the country, it gets better and better. In the city, people are just maniacs. Like, there's just no respect or regard for human life whatsoever. And I think that there's a lot to unpack with that. Obviously this liberal mindset that exists today is more prevalent in cities because everybody's just stacked on top of each other. Everybody's just like, let me just kill my kids, get out of my way. I'm going to cut you off. I'm going to tailgate you. Like, if you disagree with me politically, you're not a human. Like, that mindset, that whole liberal city mindset, it's all within the big, heavily populated cities. But then as you get farther and farther away from that, people become more conservative. They become more nicer, more patient, more gentle, more kind, more loving. They value human life more. Because when you live out in the country, you need neighbors. Because what if the apocalypse? It's like you need like a community of people. You need people around you with guns that you're friends with. You need people around you that have livestock for meat and for milk and eggs and gardens and these kind of, with wells that pump water out. Like, you need a community of people. But when you live in the city, you have an overabundance of people, yet there's no community. We're all just stacked on top of each other. I lived in an apartment for a long time, and it's like I never even spoke to my neighbors. You don't even know each other, and you're living in the same box. But I want to talk about balance because yesterday afternoon when I was on the way home, I'm a reasonable guy. I go the speed limit. I just stay in my lane. I just cruise, and I just try to flow with the traffic and I'm just trying to live, man. I'm just trying to just get to where I'm going and get home. That's all. I'm not interested in racing. I'm not interested in being first. I'll let people in if they're trying to get in. Like, I'm not going to speed up. I just want to survive the day. That's my goal. I'm not in a competition with anybody. But there was a guy, who for legal purposes, I'm going the speed limit. Okay, you know what I'm saying. But I'm going at a reasonable speed and just tailgating me, and then, jerks out from behind me, jerks in front of me, and then even goes off my lane and then into the shoulder and then back onto the lane. And then, it's just unhinged behavior. Like, I don't understand why people behave this way, where they're just so in competition and so angry and vengeful on the road. It's extremely dangerous. Like, it comes from a complete level of delusion. We all want to go a little bit more than the speed limit, but it's like, this is unreasonable behavior we're talking about. And it's dangerous. Like, it's not worth dying for, man. Just to be like, I'm first. I made it. And it's like, the goal isn't to be first. The goal is to survive. To get home. And if everybody had this mindset, this Christian conservative mindset here, where we value the people that are around us, even if, we don't even know them or what they believe or who they are, there would be probably never any accidents on the road ever, as you get into the city, it's like every morning, like every afternoon, every evening, it's like there's just constant accidents. And here's the thing. One time I got in an accident when I was a teenager, and to get it expunged off my record, I had to take this ridiculous, like, driving education course where it's like 3 hours of class and you gotta go like 9 times. And the guy said on there's no such things as accidents. They're not called accidents. They're called collisions. Because an accident is something that happens by accident. A collision is something that happens that could have been prevented, but because of the error of the driver, it caused a collision. So that's that proper. It's a collision because it's like you're driving like an idiot. You're texting. You're making a Christian YouTube video. You are tailgating people. It's just insane behavior. Weaving in and out of traffic. Like, it's just not worth it, man. But I want to talk about the concept of balance, because this guy that I'm talking about, tailgating, swerving out into this lane, swerving back into this lane, where he's overcompensating, he's going into the shoulder and then back out. Like, he saw that as a victory. It's like, yeah, I just beat that guy. I just won. And it's like, that's a failure. Like if you're in a video game that's like a driving simulator, I mean, you would have lost a ton of points. Tailgating, not using your blinker twice, cutting that guy off when you try to, get around me, swerving into the shoulder. Like, that's a loss. Like, that's not, these people, like, these kind of people get on social media and they're so, like, prideful and they think they're so good at driving and they just want to blame everybody else. And it's like, you're not a good driver. You're a bad driver. Like, that's what you're doing is incorrect. So there's no balance there. He's just like just jerking from side to side, whereas me, I'm just cruising. I'm just within the lines. I'm not rigid and just going straight forever. If I did that, I'd cause an accident. I'm not being rigid, but I'm being balanced and I'm flowing and I'm staying within the lines and I'm weaving through the roads. I'm staying in my lane, but the roads curve. Roads aren't straight. You curve. So I'm flowing and I'm balanced between the lines, and that's the best place to be. And I don't get involved with road rage. Like, people have road rage against you and stuff on the road, and then people want to be vengeful back. The Bible says, vengeance belongs to the Lord. It doesn't belong to you. And I don't even get fired up. I'm just like, wow, that was dumb of that guy to do that, And then I just go about my day. I don't get angry and feed into that, And I think a lot of it comes from people are just unhappy with their lives. There's no more joy in the world. Christmas just passed and they sing the song, joy to the world. And it's like, Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year, and then it's immediately followed up by the worst time of the year where you got to take all your Christmas decorations down and go back to work. But for the most part, I enjoy my life. It's like, great if the Lord comes back, but also like I am cool with what I got now. I'm kind of digging it. Like, and I'd even be cool if it, if I got to live to be an old man, and just died an old man. But you got to have that balance. And there's a Bible verse that says an unjust weight is an abomination to the Lord. Okay? So that means you don't want to be too heavy on one side or the other side, because then you're going to be off balance. You want to be, in the middle. You want those scales to be just like that. Just, not, just right in the middle. That's the best place to be. In that last video, it's like you got to be as wise as serpents and gentle as doves. That's a balance there. You got to be balanced in the Christian life. And a lot of times, I like to use this analogy a lot in my preaching and stuff, but it seems like the Bible refers to us as like a fruit tree, especially in Psalm chapter 1, where if you delight in the law of the Lord, you'll be blessed. Like, you'll be rooted down, you'll be by the water, you'll give your fruit in your season, your leaf shall not wither, like that kind of stuff. And the thing about trees, because look, you can call me hippy dippy all you want, the Bible uses nature and the creation a lot to teach us lessons. And that's something like, and we're not going to go on a boomer rant today, but it's like, these people are just like, we got to put everything in plastic and over sanitize. And it's like, no, like, we need to be out in nature, and God will speak to you in ways that you could never imagine. And then you compare it with scripture, because the problem is a lot of these scriptures we don't understand, because it's about nature, it's about wildlife, it's about fruit trees, it's about farming, it's about forests and insects, and like, God is constant. Just read the Bible, man. That's like, this is my thing, is like, just read the Bible, and then you won't be so uncomfortable with everything that I say all the time. Maybe I can finally have some real Christian friends if they just would read their Bible. The problem is people will then turn around and worship nature and worship the creation rather than the creator, which is blessed forever. Amen. Right? Because in their vain imaginations and this kind of stuff, they're foolish. I was like, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools because they think they're so wise, but they're actually a fool because the nature is supposed to point you to the creator. The creation is supposed to point you to the creator. And that's the problem, like we're talking about balance, right? And I don't know if I can articulate this properly or not, but one of the things that I've noticed, like if we were to engage in the false binary of politics, it seems like, and hear me out, all right? It seems like a lot of the times the left is right. They have the right answer, but the math that they use to get to that answer is wrong. And then the right has the wrong answer, but the math that they use to get to their answer is right, if that makes sense. And so it's this weird, like, yin and yang symbolism or something. And probably because politics is satanic, because it's at the end of the day, it's the devil pulling the strings, so he's got everybody in this yin and yang, where it's like you're right but you're wrong, and you're wrong but you're right, all at the same time. And that's why there's just these endless political debates where nobody ever, figures it out. And, like, for example, the left is like, Trump is bad. Okay? That answer is correct. But how did you get to that answer? Because he's a homophobe. And it's like, no, he's not the math is wrong. It's like a teacher in school. It's like, I want you to show me how you got to this. I want to see your work, The work is incorrect. And then the right goes, Trump is good. No, that answer's wrong. And then they say, well, why is he good? Because he's a homophobe. Or no, because he loves homos. It's like, no. Because Trump, that might not even make sense, but Trump is bad, not because he's a homophobe, but he's bad because he loves homos, because he's all about the homos. That's why Trump is bad. So it's like everybody's right and wrong at the same time in that realm, so you can never be right. It's an unjust balance. It's like you can't win in that realm. But it's like, so to go back to the creator thing, the hippy dippy, witches and all that kind of stuff, they're like, they love the nature and they love the creation, but then they reject the creator. And then you have the Christian side that's like, they love the creator, but they reject the creation. No, we need, put it in plastic, sanitize it, don't let kids play outside, don't let them play in the dirt, put a jacket on that kid, it's cold, they're going to get the flu. And it's like, that's not how diseases work. You don't get, being outside without a jacket on and being outside with bare feet is actually good for you. Oh, you're a pagan. Whatever. You got to have the balance. You can appreciate the nature. You can use the nature. You can have, get the medicines from the nature. You can forage in the nature, and appreciate and love and be in the nature and be barefoot and, not have a jacket on all the time. You can get wet. You don't need an umbrella. You can get wet sometimes. It's okay, But then you can also appreciate the creator and worship the creator. You can do both. It's a balance. You got to be balanced. And to go back to the Psalm chapter 1, the fruit tree, trees are not rigid. If a tree was rigid, a tree would snap in the wind. But watch a tree. Go to the creation. Watch the creation. Observe the creation. Again, we're so disconnected from the creation that we're missing so many good lessons here. A tree in the wind, forgive me, I'm like a little sick or something this morning, I don't know what's going on. But a tree in the wind will flow, right? A tree's not rigid. You know, a tree will flow in the wind. Flow, right? And even like skyscrapers in cities are built like that, where they're not rigid. They actually are designed to have a little bit of movement to them in the wind, because if they were completely rigid, they would snap. They would fall over. So you got to be able to flow a little bit. But when the wind comes, yeah, you got to be able to flow, but you also got to be rooted down in the truth and in the foundation that is Jesus Christ and in the Bible, because if you're not rooted down, though, you're going to get ripped right out of the ground and you're going to go flying. So yeah, you got to be rooted down, but you don't want to be rigid. You want to flow a little bit. You got to have a little bit of wiggle room. You got to have a little bit of grace. Okay? If you're too rigid, you know, because look, again, the false binary thing, are you a fundamentalist or are you a modernist? You know, it's like, you know, I don't know, because when the modernists, look, you got to listen to people, okay? And again, not to quote another like heathen, but like, you know, The Art of War by Sun Tzu, you know, you got to know your enemy and know yourself, and then you'll never be defeated, right? If you're going to go to war with somebody, you know, not physically necessarily, but like spiritually or politically or mentally, or, you know, in an argument or something, you need to know your enemy. And you can't just write people off. You got to learn their position. You got to learn what they believe. And you can't just make something up and then shun them. You know, that's what, what a spiritually weak person does. They put up a straw man argument that you don't even believe. They attack that strong man, and then they shun you, and then they don't give you an opportunity to respond. You know, that's what a weak person does. That's what a cult sounds like. So when a modernist says, oh, you guys are too legalistic, don't just roll your eyes and shun them, okay? And make up a bunch of stuff. Okay, find out why they believe that. And again, it's like the Democrat-Republican thing, like the right answer but the wrong math, or the wrong answer but the right math. It's like, you don't want to be too legalistic, okay? You love the law. Psalm 1, you delight in the law. You know, in his law doth you meditate day and night, you know, and you shall be like a tree. So when they say legalistic, like, I see it as being like way too like rigid. Like, you want to have to be able to flow a little bit. But here's the problem: is like the fundamentalist side, sometimes we can be too rigid, and then the modernist side, they're way too loosey-goosey. They're just flopping all over the place. They're not rooted down. You know, when the wind comes, it plucks them out. They replant again, it plucks them out. They never get rooted. They're just flopping in the wind. All right, so what's the balance there? You know, the balance is be rooted, but, you know, be able to flow in the wind a little bit, you know? Like, that's spiritual maturity. You know, you should be able to listen to people that you don't 100% agree with and not make up stuff about them and attack them. And you should be able to learn something from them even. You know, there's been, like, I got invited to a modernist church, like, last Easter, and after we left, I found out they had, like, a female deacon, so I'm never going to go there again, because it's just nuts. And there was a whole thing where it was, like, the Easter service, and they got some woman up there talking with the pastor, giving her personal testimony. It was super weird, but I'm like, I'm not coming back here again. But, you know, I got invited, and we went, and there was certain things I was like, all right, let me pay attention during the sermon and see if I can get something out of this. And there were certain things that I got from it. Like, I think one of the things is, like, when Jesus was taken down from the cross and put in the rich man's tomb, it said something to the degree of, he was laid where no man had been laid before, or something like that, where it's like, oh, so it's one of those things where it's like symbolic. It's like he went where no man was willing to go. He went where no man has gone before. It's like there's spiritual applications to that, where it's like, yeah, he like was sinless. Yeah, he went to the cross. Like, he went to hell and was resurrected. Like he did what no man had done before. He was willing to go where no man had gone before. No man could go before. There's things to be learned. And that pastor didn't say that. I kind of like noticed that myself. But the point is, like, there's things that can be learned, from people that you don't 100% agree with, And the modernists should look at us and say, like, you guys are like way too hyper grace to the point of lasciviousness. Like, they should be like, oh, you're just legalistic. It's like they should consider what we're saying, consider our side, and not just attack us. And they should, adapt and make a change, You gotta have the balance in this life. You gotta be balanced. Everything is about balance. Like the Bible says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, that kind of thing. But the thing about wrestling, and I wouldn't consider myself a wrestler, but I'm a martial artist. I would go as far and say that. I got the ear. I don't know if you can see that in the camera or not, but that's from training with wrestlers. That's how I got that. And the thing about wrestling, like, we're supposed to be wrestling, but we're supposed to be doing a spiritual battle, spiritual wrestle, right? A spiritual meet or match. We're supposed to wrestle with spiritual things. Wrestling is all about balance. It's basically just a big game of balance. It's like, who has the better balance? That's who's going to win. And yeah, it's like, there are people that I don't agree with 100% that I can listen to. There's like, I've listened to like Muslim guys on like YouTube or podcasts and stuff. I've listened to like Jewish rabbis. I've listened to, Calvinists and because I'm not scared. I'm not scared because I'm rooted down in what I believe. I'm rooted down in the Bible, and I know what's true, and I know what the false doctrine is. So I can endure, and I can just, eat the meat and spit out the bones or whatever. I can take what's good and discard the rest. It's like Bruce Lee. Like, to go back to martial arts, like Bruce Lee is like, back then, people were really rigid on their martial arts styles. It's like, you gotta be kung fu only. And then Bruce Lee's like, no, there's flaws in kung fu. So he kind of was like one of the first guys who really tried to blend all the styles. He blended kung fu principles into boxing and kickboxing and wrestling. And he was like combining all of them to try to find the best stuff to come up with his own thing. Like, he's like, I don't have a style. I'm free. I'm freestyle. I'm free of style. And that's like still today, like in the UFC and stuff, like some guys, like, they'll claim to be a boxer, claim to be a wrestler. Some guys claim to be freestyle, free of style. I'm not super rigid in one style, but rather I'm taking the best from every style and then discarding the rest. So the Bruce Lee quote is like, take truth from anywhere you can and discard the rest, and then add on your own personal, like, cherry on top, and then you'll, that's what you're supposed to do. And they're like, for instance, like a Jeff Durbin or something. Like, I'm not the biggest like Dirty Durbin fan or anything, but like, there's things about him that I like. I'm not gonna like deny my feelings for Jeff Durbin. It's like, there's things that I like. And I'm not going to be like, I'm not allowed to like, I am not allowed, cannot like, only can I like fundamentalists. Like, no, there's things that I like about him. I really, like, he's never won anybody to the Lord in any of his videos, but I appreciate his gentle approach to people when he's talking to them on the street. He's got a really good approach in how he engages and talks to people. Is actually really good and interesting, and it gets people that are usually turned off completely by Christianity more engaged and more interested. Like, he'll have conversations with atheists who are like, who, you know, grew up in a fundamentalist Christian home, and they've rebelled and turned against Christianity, and then he's like, well, why did you do that? And they're like explaining, and it's like, because my parents would just like enforce the Bible on me without ever explaining to me why. And see, the Bible is like, this is a problem in fundamentalism. This is a problem in fundamentalism, is that the Bible says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. And you have in the fundamentalist circles no training, but rather just like beating into submission. Okay? And don't twist what I'm saying. This isn't about any particular person. This is in general. This is a problem. And if you've been in the fundamentalist circle long enough, you'll be aware of it. You know, like just beating the commandments into, you know, just beating the child into submission without teaching them and explaining to them and showing them from the Bible why this is good, why this is the best way, but rather you just obey or you get a beating. Okay, that is going to breed rebellion. That just is. That's what creates rebellion. Like, it's only logical to rebel against that. It's not, it would be illogical. Like, hey, mom and dad, why do we believe this? Shut up. Take your beating. Just do it. Don't ask questions. You know, even if you're not beating them, it's just like, don't ask questions. Don't ask questions. Just do it. It's what the Bible says. You can't lovingly teach your children. You can't lovingly show your children the truth. You have to just be so rigid. And then you have the modernists who are like, just whatever, just watch Moana. You know, but, so this guy, Jeff started talking to this guy, and Jeff Durbin's like, you were right for rebelling. Oh, how dare you, Brother Daniel. No, that is logical to rebel against that. That is not what Jesus Christ intends for children and for the children of Christians. That is not at all the intention. That's not what Jesus Christ wants. You know, you are not supposed to just like, you know, follow the law and that's it. Don't ask any questions. You should ask questions. In fact, it seemed like Jesus Christ constantly was asking questions because he's asking questions to challenge the religious dogma and hierarchy of the day. Because Christians say too that a lot of these, oh, the fundamentalists are Pharisees. Look, don't just like, there's some truth to that. Why are they saying that? They're not saying that for no reason. Why are they saying that? Because that is true. There are a lot of people in the fundamentalist circles who forsake the Bible in exchange for their own tradition, and they enforce their tradition, you know, as if it's a commandment of God, and it's not. That breeds rebellion. That's what causes rebellion. You should ask questions. You should be challenging the traditions. You should be challenging. You know, I used to tell my teenagers in the Sunday school class, I used to say Jesus was a rebel. You know, he was rebellious. He was a troublemaker. You need to be a troublemaker like Jesus. That's what I used to tell them. Like, be a troublemaker. Ask questions. You know, challenge this stuff. No wonder why it didn't work out, because they don't want an entire generation growing up being interested in the Bible, being interested in Christianity, Jesus Christ, and the truth, because then that will challenge their traditions. Hey, be a troublemaker. Jesus was a troublemaker, man. He caused a lot of trouble. You know, he was flipping tables and cracking whips and asking questions, calling people vipers and hypocrites and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's what I'm saying about the spiritual maturity thing. Is like, I'm at a position in my life where I'm more concerned with hypocrisy. I'm more worried about hypocrisy rather than like sinless perfection. Because here's the thing, we're all sinners. You know, there's nobody that's sinless except Jesse Lee Peterson or whatever. You know, we're all sinless, or we're all sinners. We're all sinners, so you can't hyperanalyze people. You can't pick people apart because anybody can be picked apart. I can be picked apart. You can be picked apart. So I'm more concerned, not necessarily about people being 100% morally in line with the Bible 100% all the time, because it's not realistic. I'm more concerned about hypocrisy. Jesus was okay, and I'm not one of these people, oh, he was, in the gay bars and stuff. That's not true. But he was obviously communicating and having understanding and grace for like prostitutes and for sinners, right? What he didn't have tolerance for was for the hypocrite who was saying one thing, but then in their heart or in their private life, they're enforcing something that they themselves don't do. And it's spiritual usury. Like, you know what usury is? It's a sin in the Bible where you're not supposed to lend money, in exchange for interest. Like, if I give you a loan for $100, hey, you got to pay this back, but you got to pay me $110. That's usury. There's a spiritual usury. I'm sorry. There's a spiritual usury where you are claiming to be this level of spiritual, but really you're not. And really what you're doing is you're borrowing that spirituality and using it as a public display. Okay, but here's the thing, is like, you got to pay that back. Okay? It's like you take a loan for a house. Like, I have a mortgage. Okay? I don't own my house. Like, a bank gives me money, and then I use that money to buy the house from the homeowner, from the seller, but then now I owe money to that bank. So what people do is they are hypocrites. They are not hyper spiritual people in their personal life when no one's around, when no one's watching, and in their heart. But they borrow. They take a loan on spiritual things. They borrow it so they can. It's like me with my house. Look at my house. I don't own that house. And then these people go, look how spiritual I am. You're not spiritual. You borrowed that. It's like you took a spiritual loan out, and you got to repay that. That's hypocrisy, where you're presenting yourself in one way, but to be seen of men, right? Like, that's not good. You gotta have that balance. Like, yeah, there's, like in James, it's like, I'll show you my faith by my works. It's like, there's a certain degree of being seen of men that's okay, right? But if you're doing something just to be seen of men, that's hypocrisy. But if you're doing something good, you're doing a good work spiritually to be an example, to help motivate or guide other people, like Paul's like, follow me as I follow Christ. It's like, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But the problem is the hypocrisy. The problem is, look at me, look at me, look at me. But in your heart, it's not the same. You got to be spiritual for God only as well, when nobody's watching. When it's just God watching, how spiritual are you then, That's a problem. You got to have that balance in your life. An unjust weight is an abomination to the Lord. You got to be rooted down, but when the wind blows, you need to be a little bit pliable. Not too pliable. Because if you're too pliable, like, you'll break too. If you're too rigid, you'll break in the wind. But if you're too floppy, you'll break off in the wind as well. You'll fall over and snap. Okay? But there's a balance there. There's grace there. There's a little bit of wiggle room. Okay, that's the spiritual maturity. Anyway, we're at like 40 minutes. I hope that made sense. Leave a comment and all that nonsense, and talk to you later. God bless.